I saw my name on the list, first on the list of speakers for Chapel Talks this summer. It was not a surprise. It was just my luck that I had to give a chapel talk in the midst of college apps, a con law essay, an oral argument tomorrow, and the typical additional stress of senior year. Now, let's get down to business. I was born into a family of refugees. My father and his family survived the Khmer Rouge regime that committed mass genocide and wiped about a quarter of the country's population. Each survivor has their own story, and I'm going to tell you my father's and how it has affected me in all the decisions I make, specifically how I got right here. Okay. My father was born in a village in the Battambang province in the midst of the war between the United States and Vietnam. He had 4 siblings, 2 whom he had lost during the regime. My grandfather was an ordinary farmer with minimal and informal education. The only form of education he could receive was from the temple, where the monks taught one another how to read, write, and follow scriptures. He recalls that on the first day of the regime, looking around and witnessing utter chaos and people running in groups, their faces full of tears, linking fingers with only a few bags with their possessions. People were pointing guns in the air, telling the group to continue moving, and my father held tightly to my grandmother's hand. They walked and walked until they reached a new town they were forced to live in. He did not know how far he was from home, but his father made a new hut for his family to settle in. Each day, he stayed at home while everyone else worked. Specifically, my grandmother went to work early in the morning until late at night. She was offered food once a day and would hide it in her sarong to give it to her children. My father remembers one instance where my grandmother gave him more potatoes than his eldest brother, causing his brother to be very angry at him. My father was only 6 years old, but later his brother died of starvation on the same day of his father. Their bodies, covered in white sheets, were laid outside the hut by a greenish well for people to pay their respects. Death was something that he became numb to and was no longer scared of. Under the Khmer Rouge, you could not show emotion, and everyone addressed one another as comrade. Everyone wore either black and red and were forced to suppress all of their emotions. My father was in a youth concentration camp where they went through brainwashing sessions, where the comrades would educate the children on the views and philosophy of the Angkar. He was unable to head home once a week, sometimes a month. One instance, my father tried to sneak away back home, and the soldiers were already at his hut, questioning my grandmother. He was caught and subjected to abuse, where he was tied up with his hands overhead in the sleeping quarters throughout the night and carried extra loads the next day during labor. My father and his family made it all the way to the Thai border and received notice that they would be going to the U.S. in 1983. They had chances to leave earlier, but my grandmother let other families go before them. There were multiple interviews until they were sent to a holding center. They were then sponsored by a church to come to the United States. They moved state to state, trying to find a place to settle until they landed in Lowell, Massachusetts, and have stayed there ever since. My father went back to Cambodia after graduate school to help volunteer, and that's where he met my mother, and now I'm here. That's me. Lowell, Massachusetts is a very diverse city. I grew up in a heavily populated Asian area where Cambodian Americans were the majority. My dad is now well known throughout the Cambodian community for his volunteer work in the city. My parents never talked about their past, and I wasn't aware of it until middle school. My teachers made it a priority for all of us to learn our roots and the history where we came from and how our parents got here. Thus, we read First They Killed My Father, which is now a movie on Netflix, so you should watch that, in the 6th grade, and studied the history of genocide. I remember coming home, bombarding my father with questions about the regime, and we would talk for hours on end about the topic. Every time the topic was brought up, I couldn't help tearing up and feeling bad for my family, and I couldn't do anything to help. My family had made the valiant effort to make sure I had a bed to sleep on and that I never slept on an empty stomach like they did. To repay them, I was always, and guess still am, hard on myself, especially when it comes to school, to make them proud. In the 8th grade, I was basically president of anything you could imagine and valedictorian of my grade. Little did I know, I was a big fish in a small pond. But I wanted to show my parents that their struggle was worth it, as I'm living the life that was not even fathomable to them at that age. I remember that there were murmurs about a scholarship to a prep school that some chosen students were competing for. At first, I was not part of the initial group because my teachers forgot about me per usual, until I walked into the office one day while the principal was having a meeting with the other kids. I guess fate has a funny way of working things out for all of us. The scholarship was for a school named Millbrook, and the initial plan was to apply, see if I got in, and not take it because leaving home was something terrifying for my parents, and I know definitely for me. The game plan was to go to public school and excel there. Isn't that funny? After gym class one day, I was called into the office. I was sweating, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. I was really wondering why they would call me in. I definitely knew that I wasn't in trouble. And guess what? I had an interview with this man with glasses who wore a really fancy suit that drove 3 hours to see the group of us. Obviously, that man is the one and only Mr. Downs. I sat there for what felt like ages, talking to this man, literally shaking. I was not really good at interviewing or talking to adults in general back then. As time passed, I grew comfortable and the conversation started flowing, and I guess I did better than I thought because I'm standing right here. The group was down to my best friend and I competing for the admission spot, and we did not really bicker about it like you would typically think. Each of us wanted the other to take the spot. The last process was to come up to Millbrook and tour here alongside interviewing again. Then we were told that in a couple of weeks we would hear the judgment call. I remember coming back from school that day to find out that I got it. I cried and had a really deep conversation with my dad. He wanted me to go, but I was totally unsure about this whole situation. This was something that was not even a thought to us a couple months ago. A little parched. I would have never thought that I would ever be going to prep school. And not a lot of people from my area do or have the privilege to do so. My father always wanted a better life for me, and he knew coming to Millbrook would help ensure that. It's not every day that a refugee gets to say that he was capable of sending his daughter off to prep school. Oh, God. And here I am. Sorry. Okay. Millbrook has shaped me into the person I am today and continues to push me to be the best version of myself. Told myself I wouldn't cry. Okay. I have done things that would never even been possible to do if I was back at home. Sorry. Okay, give me a second. I wouldn't have been able to have a private education, the confidence to speak like this in front of crowds, or the privilege to help children in the Dominican Republic this summer. It has given me things that will carry on long after Millbrook, and that end seems pretty far at this moment, but it's really not. I know all my relatives would be shocked to see their granddaughter or niece to be a well-educated woman, and I really wish that they can see me up here right now. Okay. I know that's easy to bash on the school when things get hard, but I hope you take away that Millbrook is full of endless opportunities and people who really want you to succeed. Click. It is truly a privilege to be here, and the only thing you can do is take advantage of it. Thank you.